Why should I change my format to be more optimal when these people are going to go to these huge majors and then play on suboptimal settings? Because
Yeah.
what's the point of me training on this great hyperbolic chamber when I go into the freaking real world and it's all garbage? I'm just training for no reason. I'm training to be
Yeah.
worse.
Hello, and welcome to the Absolute Guard podcast.
We're the podcast that chronicles the past and the present of the fighting game community and bring on various perspectives from Arizona and throughout the world. You can find us on Twitch at twitch.tv/Spiral Series, on YouTube with the VOD at youtube.com/Spiral Series, and on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify under Absolute Guard. To all of you watching and listening, we appreciate you. And if you've liked or subscribed, tweeted or retweeted, definitely appreciative of that. And we welcome any feedback that you have. This is episode 17. I'm your co-host, Benny, aka Grandmaster B. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, John, a fellow cat owner. John, in your opinion, how many cats are too many?
Too many. I don't know because I've seen I think two are too many for me, but I've also seen I have a friend who has like 6 cats and they seem to make it work. So I don't really know what the answer is. I guess it's just however many litter boxes you have plus one.
That was so random. I was just thinking about that now because I was like, I have 3, or I had 4 at one point until the other one passed. Then I was like, well, you got 2. I was like, is 2 too much for you?
Yeah, 2 is too much for me, and my space is very limited. But we have many litter boxes in our home now because of it.
Nice.
How was your week, man?
It's been pretty good. Just kind of chilling, getting used to our new schedule here. Kind of threw me for a loop. I'm used to doing prep work today, and then I was just like, hold on, we have a podcast today.
Yeah, we're doing the Tuesdays now, huh?
Yeah, so that's I'm still getting used to that, but overall, everything's been pretty cool. I went out on a flight on Thursday, which was pretty awesome.
Nice.
So I had a lot of fun doing that.
How much time did you spend in the air, right? Because they gauge you based on the amount of time you spend or something.
Yeah. So it was another 50 minutes around Mesa. Yeah, I was just checking out another instructor, different type of plane. I think I actually might go with that guy because it's cheaper, and then it's also there's a whole different viewpoint in that kind of plane that he has. So
nice.
I was pretty happy overall, happy with that experience, and the guy that and meeting him and talking to him and what he was doing. So that was pretty awesome.
Very cool. I imagine you got to interview them, and because you're basically trusting your life with them,
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, and at the same time, I'm the consumer. If I don't like the guy, I could just back out right there and be like, you know what, I don't want to do this, and just leave. I mean, that might not go over well with some people, but it's just at the same.
Wait, you can't just leave. What if you're in the air? You can't ask to see the manager while you're in the air.
Not in the air. The pre-interview, right? If I walked in and I got a bad vibe, I would have been like, you know what? Something just came up, this. I'm not gonna go out there with you, but yeah, it was a good experience, man. It was cool. Yeah. Cool. So who do we have on the show today?
So today our guest is going to be Shivel Tim. I'm going to go ahead and bring him on here. Welcome, Tim.
Hello.
How's it going,
Tim?
Good.
So when I think of Tim, he is somebody who I've known for probably, I think, about 10 years now.
Probably more, actually, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like we've bonded a lot over playing Street Fighter V together in recent years. During the pandemic, we were talking quite a bit and trading strats and stuff. But even prior to all that stuff, 10 years ago or greater than 10 years ago, you are a good friend of Nick Going, who we had on the podcast recently, and you actually came and visited our our tournaments in the era that I ran tournaments at. So the Ranbats that I ran at, you frequently traveled from California to
Yep.
Arizona to enter our tournaments. So
Yep.
that's
I,
kind of how
I
I know
brought
you.
I brought multiple enemies.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's kind
So
of how, yeah, when I think of Tim too, like that was kind of the same thing. Like it was him, and like yeah, I always just kind of referred to him as like, oh, that's Nick's friend, until I started seeing him more frequently.
yeah. Actually, honestly, okay. Let's get the elephant in the room here. Is that he came over and he won a couple of our tournaments, and so I was a little bit like, nah, fuck this guy. He's an invader. There's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that. But what it really was is like my first introduction to the idea of a sister scene or a cousin scene. Because to me, SoCal was always just like the people that you would see on the streams and like the
Mm.
celebrities at that time. But as far as like the grassroots like players that are willing to come over, forge new friendships and stuff, I would put Tim and his merry band of troops that he'd bring over with him. I'd put them in that group.
Yeah, usually
Sister
I
scene.
came over with like, I mean, if John was already there, if he wasn't already there, he was with us in the car. It was John, Nick, and myself, and then usually we would come with like Christian, ETR, and then I came
Yep.
with like Team C Slug, right? Like Trevor. So like those are the guys that we brought in, and then every now and again we brought Brent in, and then Brent would like
Yeah.
destroy everybody, right? So,
Yep. Yep. I remember
but then again,
that.
Brent, at least true to his nature, was pretty good in California as well. Like he was pretty good at Wednesday fights. He was good at the other local Rambats and whatnot. So he wasn't like a fraudulent player by any means. He was pretty good.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of coincides with the narrative that we wove with Driftwood's story last a couple of episodes ago, where he came up in Tucson, Arizona, moved out to Cali, got to
Yeah.
get the competitive experience there, and brought it back to Arizona. But when we say
Hmm.
brought it back, he brought himself back, obviously, and John Guerrero Velociraptor as well. But he brought back those friendships that he made as well, and then folks like yourself and ETR and company all came over too. So
Yeah,
we
I mean,
got we
like
got a taste of the Cali scene in
Yeah.
because of you guys basically.
you got like a good mix of it too, because obviously Brent was still competing, and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
up until the Arizona trips that I took, I had not played for a year and a half.
I see. Okay.
Because I was just it was like general burnout. I graduated college, so like my scene that I went with, which I will argue to this day is the best scene in like the U.S. when we
Oh.
played, because we had like four Evo top 16 placements within our year that we started playing together. The trio that I played with the most, which is Andy OCR, Tatsu, and Warrock, they
Yeah.
pretty much beat every single trios tournament that was in the United States. They were the first Hori sponsored team in the United States, and the only other person that was sponsored by Hori was Sako.
Yeah.
So like, you know what I mean? Like there was a lot of talent. And then when I
Dude,
made the damn club in UCI, we had like Clockwork, we had like Tim Wen, right? Wentinol, we had Y2J. Like we had a bunch of people that had been Evo finalists beforehand and then placed Evo top 8 at like Marvel 3 when they started having like consistent sessions, right? And then we even have young talent. We had like Richard Nguyen, we
mm-hmm.
had Jason Nee, right? Jace the Ace.
Yep.
And then even the minor bit parts like myself, we had other people that would always win every other like non high variance tournament. So like
Yeah.
when we played from like 2010 to 2012, I honestly believe the OC scene and Vaya was a big part of it too. Like they kind of like ran everything Southern California had.
Yeah, I can tell you as like an outsider from that, like SoCal was basically just Wednesday night fights. Like that was the
Sure.
defining thing. Like yeah, you get the SCR or the other like other like West Coast Warzone. Those kinds of tournaments would show up and
Yeah.
you'd put the SoCal label on them. But by and large, you mainly just thought of Super Arcade and Wednesday night fights.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
was a little bit down the road for sure. And then obviously East Coast had like NLBC or like whatever that was before, Next Level, and
Yeah.
its predecessors. I
Yeah.
think it was like Battle Circuit. I believe it was Battle Circuit.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
they had like Zeus. They had Smug when he was coming up. Shine was pretty good back then too.
The pie
I
guys, right?
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
pie guys exactly. But I
Yeah.
would reaffirm the fact that like I believe the OC kids were just way better. I mean, obviously individual talent. Like Dew was probably the best in the U.S. PR Rod when he moved over was obviously incredible. Ricky is great. Justin's
Yeah.
great. Like, all the EG guys, K Brad was great, whatever. But like man, when the OC kids were like at its peak, uh,
Yeah.
we were like we were the group.
Yeah.
legitimately for like Southern California.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Tatsu because like for me that's a big turning point in my FGC career because he played Neo Weirdo Neo at Evo 2010
Yeah,
and
okay.
that
Yeah,
was
the
like
Alaska thing. Yeah.
top 16, yeah, and it was like the that was before I had ever gone to Evo and I was watching the stream and they were like, yeah, Neo's up, and then I hear the name Tatsu and of course like John said, like the celebrities, the SoCals, and it's like this is like a big name, and then
Hmm.
for him to go on that stage and then to win, and then the big thing was like he ended up like taunting in that match too and like getting the crowd all hyped up, and I remember being at home and just like, oh my god, this is crazy, like Neo's doing things like on the national stage, like, and that was a big thing, like a real big thing for me and I think for the Alaska scene in general, because it was just like, here, there's one of us, taking down one of the SoCal players. So yeah, that was a real big thing right there.
I guess my tie to Andy OCR is that he made my second Evo miserable. Was it my second or my first one? I can't remember. I think it might have. I think it was my second one. Um, I had two 8 a.m. pools. I had a Street Fighter 4 8 a.m. pool and a Marvel 8 a.m. pool, and for some reason he was in both of them, and he beat me in both of them.
Oh
What
it
the
was
no.
it was like
fuck?
my second year playing the games, so like ultimately it's not that big of a deal now. But man, I was like, man, I woke up at fucking 8 a.m. for this shit to run into him again.
No, he's a talented guy,
He's
man.
fantastic. He's a
He's
great
a really
player.
good player.
Yeah.
And then he
Yeah,
like played Sam Show and won like two majors with Sam Show, and now he's playing like KOF, and he got like top 8 at KOF at the last
Uh,
major. Like there's like very few players that I generally like played with or know that have the level of talent that he has, and he genuinely doesn't have that much time to play, right? Like so, I don't know, one of the best.
yeah, yeah. I mean, speaking of people, like let's kind of roll back things here and let's
Yeah,
talk about the origin of Shibble Tim. Give us
sure.
a little bit about the tag there. What does the Shibble part stand for, if
I think
anything?
that's a question everyone always asks me, like, what does SHBL stand for? And like
Yeah.
honestly, it doesn't stand for anything. It was like my MLG tag when I played Halo,
Oh, really?
and then Call of Duty. So it has nothing to do with fighting games at all. And
But
in short,
there's
it
no
just
meaning
stands
behind
for.
it.
I mean, the meaning is that it stands for shitball. That's
Seriously?
legitimate. Yeah, that's it. And like the first person to figure that out was Ricksta.
Oh, wow.
And he figured it out on the SRK forum. So like every single time I would post, he'd be like, "Hey, shitball," and like people wouldn't understand the correlation. But I'm like, all right. So Rick understands what the fuck I'm talking about. So that's literally it. It has nothing to do with fighting games at all. But
So we
You
should
know,
just
man.
introduce you to Shitball Tim.
you could. I will say further. I wanted to just beat Tim. My
Yeah.
first tournament I entered was just Tim at Arcade Infinity, but the issue was that that tournament already had a Tim. It was Chai Tai, and Chai Tai entered as Chai Tai. So I was like, why can't I just be Tim? And they're like, no, 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 you can't be. And this is why arcade culture is horrible, because like arcade culture is basically like legalized bullying. But like they were like, no, 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 no. There's already a Tim here. You can't be Tim. You have to be Tim too. And I'm like, the hell is that? And so they signed me up as Tim
Uh,
2 on my first tournament. And I'm like, yeah, that's trash. So I was like, well, I might as well just come with something different because I don't want to be called Tim 2. That just sounds like garbage. So I was unoriginal and just signed up as the only professional tag I had ever had beforehand, which was that. And that's it. And I just like was lack of creativity. So I'm trying to like remedy that now, right? Because like every tournament I enter, I just enter as Sesame Fat Boy because I feel like that's me taking back my name. You know what I mean? This is my choice. But that would
that's
be
why
the
I was
origin
so
for
I
it.
was so curious about how you wanted me to promote your name on this podcast, whether it was going to be Shibble Tim or Sesame Fat Boy. I didn't
It
know if it was going to
honestly
be
doesn't
Sesame
even
Fat
matter.
Boy or not.
It has no bearing to it because I have done nothing with either name. Well, I've done enough with the first tag to like at least for myself to be proud. But like obviously with
Yeah.
the second name, like I didn't do that. I haven't done that much in five to like
You
really be like, oh
motherfucker. All
But
those years that
people
I
know
kept
you.
confusing you with Shiggle BMX. All those fucking
yeah, that's
years.
not my fault. I mean like I don't
All
know.
those years.
I don't even know how it's that hard. I mean like Schickel is like an arcade name.
Because
Like
I
I have
always
a
forget
family name.
Shiggle. I always think it's Shiggle Tim and not Shibble Tim.
Yeah,
And
that's
I get it
crazy.
confused because I
Yeah, I
get
think
confused
that's
with Shibble BMX. Or
so
shit.
Sugar BMX, right? Daniel also says that too. He's like, man, you gotta change your name because it's like too close to mine. And I'm like, bro, I had nothing to do with Sunny Glen. I had nothing to do with Sunnyvale or Sunny Glen. None of my art, like my name has nothing to do with your arcade. I have never been in the golf course. It closed down before I became a fighting game member. I have no attachment to that whatsoever.
Huh. Okay. Well, we now know the origins of that name. So, how
Yeah.
about some fighting
I mean,
game origins as far as like what was your first
I was
first
gonna say, yeah,
competitive game?
benefits of having a semi-unique name is I don't really have to deal with that. You guys got John
Oh
and
yeah.
Tim, and it's just like,
Not very unique. No, you're absolutely right. Which is why you know what I mean. Like I'm trying to reclaim it, but like fighting game wise, I mean, I funny enough started out as a melee player.
Oh okay.
Ooh.
Like a lot of people,
Oh
secret.
no, we
Right?
said fighting games though. I
Yeah, you're right.
understood.
You're
Ah,
right. My bad. My bad.
jeez.
Like a secret. I was a secret melee player, right? Like I had entered like the Pomona tournaments, the big
Mhm.
UCLA tournaments with my Kirby and got like top 16 placements, and that's when I like got introduced with like competitive stuff.
Wait,
And then
how big were those tournaments that you said
huge.
UCLA?
Those were like
Like,
the big majors that they talk about that smell like farts, right? Because those are the horrible, no hygiene 150 man tournaments that like the huge melee players would enter. And I didn't know anything about them. I just knew that
yeah,
I was good enough to beat 80% of the field. And then when I
okay,
realized that like I didn't want to play the level that they were going to play at, because that's when I
yeah,
realized that the level above me is impossible to attain.
yeah,
And I wrote a story about that too. Is like, why do melee players keep doing this to themselves? They're the world's biggest masochists, right? Like, if you're a top 16 placer in melee back then, you were never going to win a tournament, right? Because are you going to beat Mango? No. Are you going to beat Leffen? Are you going to beat Armada? You're never going to touch these guys, so you're never going to win a
yeah,
tournament. I quit that shit, um, and I basically played CBS 2 after that, and Marvel 2, because they were like in my arcades, right? We had like a local arcade in Torrance, which is where I'm
yeah.
at,
Okay.
called Aladdin's Castle, and we had a bunch of other places that were like arcade cabinets at like a Steve's, which is like our local burger joint, or like a Pizza
Mhm.
Hut where they had a Marvel 2 cab. But it was only until Street Fighter 4 when it first came out in like early 2009 at the arcades where I really went like full into like the traditional fighting game, right?
Yeah.
Where I was introduced to like SRK, and I was introduced to like the Southern California competitive scene, right? Like I didn't know who Alex Valle was, although I never made the mistake of calling him Alex Valley. I didn't get why like people even had that. Like, have you not been a Southern California resident? We have like so much Hispanic culture here. How can you call him Valley? So I met them at AI. I met like Mike Ross at AI. I met like Vasant at AI. A bunch of other like old heads that like people would like revere and like read about or watch about or whatever. And I didn't know anything
Yeah.
about it. I was just like, I only went to AI specifically because of a guy named Mike Ortiz. He went by the tag Moval, which is like short for Moreno Valley. And
Uh-huh.
he was arguably like the US's best Blanca at the time. So when he introduced me, he was the one that like Xbox Live tagged me and went like, "Hey man, come to AI, join up, see what you got. You know what I mean? Like see what you're made of, type of stuff. Like come on, and we're all friendly. We're all play. Like I'll even play with you. No worries." So that
Nice.
gave
Yeah.
me like the reassurance, right? Like at the time I was like 17, so I was like, "Man, do I really want to go out to like this like weird Diamond Plaza and like hang out with people that are clearly just like have been playing?" Because I had never touched a stick before. I had
Yeah.
played on pad.
Sure.
And my first character in Street Fighter 4 was Sakura.
Oh wow.
But then I was like, I'll play Blanca. He seems like he's really easy. And so I played Blanca, and he fit my style, and he was ugly, and I thought he was funny. You know what I mean? Like I picked him because I thought he was ugly. So like I was like, okay, I'll just play him because he's ugly. Uh,
That's a pretty common thing actually with people,
yeah.
specifically with people who
With
play Blanca.
yeah, with me, for me in particular, I do pick a lot of ugly characters. That is a general trait for me. Is like the uglier the better, right? Like if they're ugly as fuck, that's the character I probably gravitate towards the most, right? Or they're like very trolly. Oh, that's like 100% in my alley.
Yeah.
So
That's it's
yeah,
funny
I went
seeing
to
the parallels because again, like a Blanca player has brought me into the scene as well. So it's just I don't know. I
what
don't know
Rick?
what it is with Blanca players. Yeah, Rick and then
Rick
my
brought
friend
you in?
Reese ended up being a Blanca
Okay.
player too eventually.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I mean, like the Blanca player that brought me in made sense because I played Blanca too. So we played a lot of sets online, and I didn't know that there was like an offline situation or setting, and arcade culture at that time was about to die. So I'm glad that I was able to get there at its its dying breath, right? Like I was there for the last part
Yeah.
of arcade culture.
Yeah.
Even though most of the time, whenever I bring it up, I tell people that like arcade culture was the fucking worst, and it's good that it's gone.
Were you at the SBO qualifier that we sent our guys over to you at?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
The one with Nico and Latif, is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was at round one actually.
Oh, was that round one? Okay.
That was at a
Fair enough.
round one. Yeah.
Fair enough. Just,
Because
just
like
bringing that up. No other reason. Just bringing
no,
it
I,
up.
I was at like every Southern California tournament I was basically in or part of or was like attending.
Very
I
cool.
was there for like SoCal regional qualifiers back when they had that stuff for the 5v5. I
Yeah, I
was there
remember
for
that.
like, and it was a big deal. Like I was
It
there with like Denjin qualifiers, SBO qualifiers, all that shit.
it was a big deal for the people outside the scene as well, because that was around the time when streaming was becoming popular, or like
Sure.
becoming a thing
Yeah.
at all, really. And so
Right.
literally the only window into the fighting game community was mainly through, it was like SoCal and the I Play Winter guys.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Which is also like if you can consider because it's also California too. I mean, like
mhm.
Yeah.
it was that and the Frame Advantage guys in New York,
Yeah,
like Sebio, right? Like in New York, who's now with Riot, but he had that New York situation where he did FrameAdvantage.com,
yeah.
and
I was
that was
wondering
how
what
you
happened to
got.
Seb. Okay, that's he
He's been
ended
in
up.
Riot for like 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay, very cool.
he's pretty comfortable. But like Frame Advantage was my first like view of like professional streaming for a fighting
Yeah.
game tournament, right? Because I think they were the top of the top. They had a whole site dedicated to it. They had YouTube weekly content, and then they had live streaming, and like nobody else did that. I know I Play Winner eventually made a site via
Yep.
Harrison or Hans, either or, and like, but they didn't have like weekly YouTube content, and they didn't upload their streams to YouTube so that it was readily accessible. And
Yeah.
I was there when Level Up first started out too, right? Like I was there when AJ first started his stream. I was there when Kara was like the first commentator they ever had, and then they realized like the stream was being too abusive, so they put James Chen and Ultra David out there. So I was there for all of their like debuts, right? Like, but even Level
Yeah.
Up didn't put up like YouTube videos and whatnot, so you don't get to see that. AI did though.
I mean, back
Yeah.
then though, like the YouTube landscape was different,
Yeah.
where like the algorithm didn't reward like
No, for sure.
daily videos and whatnot. It rewarded more like tags and categories and stuff.
Yeah, I can't speak
And
too
view
much about the
counts.
YouTube algorithm back then, obviously, because if I did, I would be a YouTube millionaire,
But it's
right?
interesting though that it ultimately shapes it, like the FGC is shaped around the development of that, right? Where now it rewards like daily content, and so you have the rise of these
Exactly.
individual influencers, right?
Yeah,
But
now it's
back
more
then it was
closely.
okay.
Yeah, go.
Back then it was all about organizations like Frame Advantage, Level Up, I Play
Yep.
Winner, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Now it's very SEO based.
Mhm.
It's actually like very, very familiar. I'm like very familiar with it. If I was like maybe like 10 years younger, who knows? I'd probably be much richer than I am now, right? So
Well, that
Yeah.
was my
It's
point
funny.
though, is that 10 years ago it was using those tags instead, so the SEO game was completely different. And I
Right.
remember all the bullshit around that too, like having
right,
to,
right.
like you had to make tags for all the misspellings and stuff too, just the common misspellings for the thing, just in case, because of how like rigid that thing was. Like, sorry, I'm ranting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you mentioned Arcade Infinity. That's
Yeah.
what you're talking about with AI, and like that's man, that's a name I haven't heard in a while. But that's those videos, like man, those were some of the ones that I remember because like there's
Right.
Mike Ross footage, classic footage in there that I used to like watch, and I'd go back and look and be like, oh man, I'm gonna take some stuff that I saw from this. Like
Yeah.
there was this whole like was he playing on a Sagat player? I forgot who it was, and like he had
That
him in the
was
corner.
that was it's not Andre, it's Hans. That was Hans.
Oh, was it Hans? Okay, because
And
yeah, because he did like
that
a
was at
jab headbutt
Denjin.
in the corner. Yeah, he
Yeah,
did
that
the
was
jab headbutt in
Denjin.
the corner. He blocked it,
And
and
then
then
he
he like
ultra.
ultra. Yeah, and I was just
Yep.
like, holy shit! I was just like, this guy's in his fucking head,
That's
and
the
I was just
original
like,
quote unquote believe moment. That's
yeah,
the Kara believe moment. And she also took the picture of Edma when he put his head on his hands because he had just won like to get into finals. Like she caught all the
yeah,
best emotions of that. And that's one of the best tournaments I think even to this day. Because that was just like pure unfiltered, like you just saw the desperation in every player.
Yeah.
yeah,
Because
that's yeah,
Mike's team was Kino. It was Kino and Mike, and then Peter and Valle, I think, were a team, and I was like, and then Hans and Magnus or Magus, I
oh
think it was
okay,
Magus. So it was Magus and
Ah,
Hans together because it was Viper,
yeah, Viper,
yeah.
yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, it was
Viper and
Viper
Sagat,
player.
and then Marn was there for a little bit. He was also a Viper player from Texas back when he was still in Texas. Yeah, there was a lot of people in that Denjin qualifier. That was a crazy that was a crazy tournament
Yeah, that
Magus
I
is
mean, yeah, just the
Magus
YouTube
is the
videos like
face of
that.
I Play Winner for me too.
for a while. Yeah, for a while because he was the main commentator.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though he was like not good at it.
Yeah.
Was Arcade Infinity the place where they had that there was that video with like the Sagat and the was it a Blanca player where they just kept on Tiger Uppercut and like there's the people in the background they're just like going crazy because he like did like 8 Tiger Uppercuts. Was that an Arcade
That's
Infinity? I thought
AI.
that was
That's
SoCal.
AI. That's
Yeah,
AI.
okay, so
Yeah,
that was
that's
that video
definitely
too.
AI. Yeah. That
I
was
don't know if you
that was
remember that.
not
You don't
enough.
remember that, John?
That was
I do. It just that's only Street Fighter 4. Oh
that
my
was a not
god.
that's not enough damage
Yeah.
versus like a random Blanca player, and he just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
fucked
I
him
just
up.
that was one of like the funniest things I saw firsthand. It was just like you just see
Yep.
everybody in the band like, hey, hey, like every time like he's getting dragon punch.
Man, that was
Street
a.
Fighter
I
4
mean,
is such trash.
it's a
Oh,
terrible game.
I'm
It's a
kidding. I'm
terrible
kidding.
game. But like, yeah,
That's
the AI Rambats were the first. I think the first real consistent YouTube collection of
yeah.
videos in the FGC around that time. And the two
yeah.
commentators that were the most consistent in those Rambats was like Sanchez, who's still around, and then Shu, who's not around anymore. So like those two were like the voices for a lot of people coming up in Street Fighter 4 because those videos were viewed. If you look at it now on YouTube and you look at the Rambats, they were viewed pretty often. Like they had pretty decent counts for
Yeah,
what they were at.
like I think that if you were to like check the current commentator scene right now, everybody would say the OGs are James Chen and Ultra David, right?
And that's
Um,
incorrect, yeah.
but yeah, like we come from an era where like the era that you're describing right now is before commentators were a thing, where people were just still trying to figure out what YouTube videos were
Yeah.
and how to put that content up there. And so the natural like intro people were like people like Magus or Sanchez, right?
Yep, yep,
Um,
yep.
that's
I
interesting.
mean, they probably wouldn't refer to themselves as anything besides, you know what I mean, a player, because you know what I
Hmm.
mean, like Sanchez is Sanchez, he's a troll. But like Sanchez was consistently on those Rambat videos as a commentator. I mean, he didn't maybe want to do it, but he was just like there to provide his like thought and feedback and his emotions. But he was there every week, right? And these were like huge brackets. They would run from like 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. Like
Damn.
it was like you get to hear his fucking voice for 12 hours, and like when you're like me, like you're an impressionable young kid, right? Like that's ingrained into your memory, right? Like, I got to hear him all the time. So like my goal, like from day one when I first entered it, was to be top 8 at AI because I thought that was the pinnacle, right? I mean, like that's your
Yeah,
goal when you first start out. Is like you got to start out
yeah, yeah.
somewhere. But Southern California scene was so difficult. In order for me to get top 8, I had to beat Gutex consistently. I had to beat Mike Ross consistently. I had to beat even like the lower tier up below them, which is like Killer Kai or like Happy Tang, right? Like you mentioned with Raymond. Like
Yeah.
all these guys were killers. They were like 15 to 16 deep, and then there's like Joe Dubs that came out, which is like a Dudley player,
Yeah.
and then like
I'm
this
aware of him.
guy like this Geef player that I forgot his name of. Like there's a bunch of people that were just like very very good.
Do you have Vangeef? Was he in your scene?
No,
But
Vance was Northern California,
Yeah,
okay,
he's
my
North
bad. I couldn't
Carolina.
and he
remember.
probably he kind of came out like in the 2010s when Super first
Yeah.
became prominent. Like that was like his
Right.
thing because like
Okay.
Geef wasn't as strong in vanilla as he was in later iterations because Stan Lightkick and the Green Hand wasn't a thing yet. They just knew
Ah.
about the jab SPD tech and like the fact that his ultra did 500 damage, right? So like he had the most damaging ultra tie with Blanca. Most people didn't know Blanca did the most damage as an ultra because the character sucked. But in vanilla, he was actually like a top 3 character.
Ah, I didn't know that. That's
Right.
interesting. I mean, most people labeled him as trash, so that's kind of
From the get go, yeah,
yeah,
maybe because he was a troll character, but like
yeah.
only like maybe like 4 characters in vanilla had a punish for ball. Like Fierce Ball bounced you up so far back that you couldn't punish it. Like Chun could punish it, and like
Honda kid.
Honda Kid, yeah, yeah, and then maybe like Abel when he first like started to become more prominent. But after that, like nobody really could punish it.
Like I remember that era, and it was less so like if like it was less so about like what the game was objectively, and more like what the meta for the community was at the time, because
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
had such little time with the game comparatively before Super came out, and
Right,
it was
exactly.
basically like, can your character hang with Sagat? And if it can, then
Yeah.
good for you. But if not, then you're probably gonna have a harder time until Super comes
Yeah,
out,
I mean, like
right?
the crazy part about the Sagat arc, right, was that Sagat was like just heralded as like this incredible character because of his damage, but he was
Hmm.
pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, like as far as top tier goes, he wasn't broken, but he
He
was
got beat very often. Like
Yeah.
I was scared
yeah.
of Akuma more than I was scared of Sagat. I was scared of Ken more than I was scared of Sagat.
He was also more accessible though to the top tier. You could get to the
Sure.
big damage, and that's the strength of Geef too, right? Is that you could just
Right.
get to that way quicker. You could just mash a DP through while you're losing, and like take half health at that era.
Yep, I agree.
So
But yeah, we moved on from there, and then
yeah,
obviously with 4, after about like college days was like 2012 or whatever for me. I kind of like stopped playing. I had put in so much time. You know what I mean? Like after a while, the burnout catches up to you, right? Because as a kid, you have a fountain of endurance. So you're going out there thinking you're invincible because you're like coming out. going to sessions, first to 100 friendship test on all your guys, right? Like you're playing, you feel great. I traveled around like every university and took on like USC tournaments, UCLA tournaments, Fullerton, like every arcade that was accessible. I went San Diego. I took money from them. Like you know what I mean? Like you went from place to place, and I had a group that I felt like was invincible. So like you just felt like you were always going to be at this level.
Yeah.
And my goal was always like top 8 at a major, top 8 Evo, right? I held it up to highest regard because I
And
felt like, yeah,
and when you find that group to play with, and all of you have that goal or some similar
exactly.
goal, it might not even be top 8. It might just be, hey, these guys want to get really good too. And like
Mm-hmm.
when you're all united in that front and you're practicing together, and the game's fresh still, like it's such a beautiful feeling. And that's
It's rare for
yeah,
sure to find everybody very motivated at the same time frame,
yeah.
same age group, whatever you want to call it. And so like that was probably my peak. And then after I graduated and like started to work, I was like, okay, everybody else also graduated too. They're starting to move on. They're playing like here and there, but I'm
Mhm.
like further away because I moved back. Like I didn't go. I wasn't in Irvine anymore, so like I wasn't within that bubble. And so once I like kind of bursted out of that bubble, I went to like Super Arcade when it kind of came up, but I really wasn't like a huge participant. Like I didn't play that much at home. I didn't play that much outside of the weeklies, and I didn't go to the
Mhm.
weeklies as consistently as I would. So like I would get like a top 8 here and there to keep my motivation up, and then that's pretty much it.
Okay.
It wasn't until I took a Canadian trip and also like a trip to Hong Kong where I fought those communities, which I had never fought before, right?
Uh-huh.
Because like you know how like it's crazy when you like think about it. It's like, oh, FGC is a global thing,
Yeah.
anyways. So of course there's
Yeah.
going to be a community somewhere, and Vancouver had its own community. That's where I met like Kenny. That's where I met Air.
Oh
And I
wow.
met
Okay.
I met all their groups. I met everybody about them. So I kind of got like a little bit of like a second win from that. And I went to the Hong Kong community, and that's where I met Johnny, right? Human Bomb. I was actually there when he moved back from Australia to Hong Kong.
Oh,
Like
very
it was
cool.
just weird serendipitous timing. Like my trip coincided with him also moving back because he had just graduated from school. So like he came back, I came back, or I came to Hong Kong, and like we just somehow
Yeah.
merged. And I played everybody in Hong Kong and beat the shit out of everybody except Human Bomb. So like he was like, oh, okay, so this guy's actually legitimate, and I was like, cool. So like immediately I got put into that clique, immediately put into like the top player clique in Hong Kong, and
Oh.
I was like, oh, okay, so this is how it feels. So like I got a little bit of a breath of like, oh, these guys are terrible, and like these guys don't have a chance, and like I'm not even that good anymore, and so like that gave me a little bit of a second win. And as I mentioned before, prior to like podcast going live, then the Arizona trips came in, persuaded to me by Nick and also John a little bit, where they're like, hey, they're starting to do like more Rambats and stuff consistently. John's putting up some stuff, and then also it's in correlation to what I'm trying to do. This is like Nick's voice, right? He's like, I'm also trying to put up a big major tournament too because they wanted to replace Devastation, right? Because
Right. Yeah.
Devastation was this horrible tournament that stole money from everybody. But it was also like Arizona's only esport event. And I'm saying esport because they had like DJ Wheat, right? They had like a bunch of other people that directed it from MLG. So like,
It was the first FGC event that was streamed as
yeah,
well
for sure. Yeah,
on
on
Justin
Justin
TV.
TV.
Yeah.
Exactly. So like Nick wanted to replace that with Rewired, which I think that's why the name was called that, because he wanted to basically give it a restart.
Yeah.
So I like kind of like hesitantly joined. I was like, well, I've never been to Arizona anymore. And Nick promised he was going to buy me food, right? So like my premise was like, I got a free lodging and he's going to
There's the
buy me
real
food.
reason. Yeah, there
Yep.
it is. There it
I
is.
get free lodging and I get free food. I was like, okay, I feel pretty good about this. And I had just previously went to Hong Kong, so I just experienced a community that I felt like was not that strong. And so you get a little bit of like endorphin ego boost, right? Like I hadn't had that in such a long time. Even in
Okay.
Vancouver, I beat up pretty much 99% of everybody except Air. And
Yeah.
Air is like what, like almost an evil top 8 finalist. I mean, like he's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Top
and Johnny
Bethesda for
too.
sure.
Johnny is a top 8, literally an evil top 8 finalist. So like I
No, I
couldn't beat evil top 8 finalists. My fault, right? Like I couldn't do that. That wasn't my level. But I was like, oh, another community where maybe I can push around some people. You know what I mean? Like egoist to me is like, damn, I really do love beating up on scrubs.
Now, if I could interject here real quick, like
Yeah.
this is like to at first glance to a listener, this would be like, hey, that's kind of like, that's cocky or whatever. But like we just talked about that with Frank Castle on a previous episode about like what it's like for ordinary players like myself and Benny to go and play in a con tournament, like with extra
Oh,
casual people, right? And
yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of that same kind of endorphin rush you're
Invincibility.
feeling, which is like, you're showing people stuff that they had never seen in the game before, so you look like a badass. And then
Yeah.
a lot of times they're excited to see all this cool shit that you're showing them, so everybody's having fun, right? And a lot of people are just excited to play new people and new people that aren't their friends, right? So it sounds very similar to that in that regard, right?
Look, you're not playing this just because you want to advance. I mean, at a certain point, you want to at least flex what you've learned.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're constantly getting beat down or every game is close to the wire, that's too much stress, man. I mean, like sometimes you just want to relax and beat somebody up.
Yeah.
Isn't that where the concept of I'm better than all my friends comes from? It's because of that. That's a concept that exists in the casual world too. Like, oh, I'm better than all my friends. You want that bragging right in existence. But like, what about I'm better than an entire state? I mean, that's so much better.
Yeah.
So I came in knowing that John and Nick were probably Arizona's two best players. Latif had just moved. So I was like, who am I actually scared of? The only person I consistently lost to was John. So if I, you know what I mean, played him in grand finals and lost, it is what it is. It's just a Wednesday night fight. So whatever. But with Nick, I had literally 50-50 against him. So I was never scared of him.
Okay.
If anything, I disrespected him so much that I would pick Blanca against Faye, which is a 7-3 matchup. And I was like, come on and try to beat me. And I would do like multiple times where I would just like absolutely clown on him. And he would be frustrated because he can't punish ball because he's like a terrible player sometimes. You know what I mean? So like, and he has no anti-airs, right? Isn't that his biggest thing? He has no anti-airs.
That was
So
the thing.
you jump in on him for free. So the only person I had trouble with in my mind was John. So when I went into it in the Rambats, I was like, all I have to be afraid of is John. And if all I have to be afraid of is John, I'll settle for second place and free food, right? Like to me, that was a pretty good vacation. So yeah, the first tournament was okay. I got like fourth. I lost to who did I lose to? I definitely lost to I beat Ernest. I geefed him. I geefed his Cammy, and I beat one of your geef players like pretty badly. And I was like, "What the hell was this?" And then I got into winners finals against Marvin, and then Marvin played Sim, and I beat the shit out of his Sim, and then he counterpicked me Bison. And then he beat me, and then I went to losers finals where I think Marvin got sent there too, and I think he beat me twice or something like that. I know Nico was 100% rooting against me, where it's like Blanca has nothing here, and I'm like, bro, what are you doing? This is already a hard as hell matchup, and I'm already being counterpicked. Like, let's relax for a second.
Yeah, I was curious about how you paired up against Nico too. He was another strong Arizona player for Street Fighter.
Nico,
4.
I didn't run into, but if I did play Nico, I probably would have beat the shit out of him too.
Oh, my understanding is he still plays, so maybe we could see a revival match at some point.
I'm never playing 4 ever again. No. I'm never touching that game again. I think that game is dirt, and I prefer it to be in the ground.
We are the FGC history podcast, and it is history. It happened, but
exactly.
It doesn't have to happen again.
If Nico wants to play me in 5, come see me.
That's funny because, like, he didn't really play 5, but like he played
I know
a
he
little
hates
bit.
it.
But just
I know he hates it.
Maybe you guys will meet up in 6.
Yeah, I mean, I'll beat him in 6 too. We'll cross generations. It's all good. I love the guy, but you know what I mean. He's not gonna touch me on that game either.
Ooh.
So that'll be the fighting game route for the most part. Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like then that was kind of the peak of your fighting game player career, but
that's
then after
the peak of my Street Fighter career actually, because NRS gave me another glimpse of like what could be too, because I did really well in Mortal Kombat 10 and then Mortal Kombat 11, and I was really good in Injustice 1. I was like a top 30 player in California in Injustice 1.
Okay, very cool.
So there were like peaks and valleys and different things, and like I had never really envisioned playing an NRS game because I hated the way it looked, and it was so clunky when I did get to play it. And disclaimer, and this is not an option select, right? I never owned any of these games.
Okay.
A pure disclaimer of the pure talent that I have, obviously, is that I just played on an hourly basis per month. I would play like 2 or 3 hours, and then that's all I had to go by.
That also seems to be a common trait with Blanca players, is to brag about how little they play.
I don't. Is it?
Yeah, Rick did that shit. Louis did that shit.
Rick is
Ethan
old.
does that
That's
shit.
different. Yeah, Rick is old. It's just different, man. I mean,
I know more people that play Blanca than any other fucking character in Street Fighter.
I mean, that's just your destiny. Maybe that's because you should be a Blanca player. I mean,
God.
You
Um,
don't have any Chun Li friends, and Benny already mentioned that he looked at the Mike Ross's like videos. Man, he has Honda people he
Yeah.
can look up
But no,
to.
I had Nico. That was it. But I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
yeah,
true.
I do know. I think I do know
And
more
you had
Blanca
John too. I
players.
think John even played Honda for a period of time as well.
John's not a Honda player.
I mean, I said he played. I didn't say he
I
was a
know.
Honda player. I said he played the character.
That requires a different wavelength for your brain, I think.
I suppose. I think he's disrespectful enough to play Honda personally, so I think it works.
Let me ask you, Tim. If you had to like identify yourself as a player of a certain game series in a fighting game community, in the fighting game community, like what would be your defining fighting game series?
Yeah, it has to be Street Fighter, right?
So you're a Street
Predominantly.
Fighter player, you
Yeah, I
think?
played 10 years of Street Fighter 4.
Makes
Yeah.
And
sense.
then the last couple of years for 5, I played a little bit more of it too. I just didn't play in the first couple of seasons. And I've had the most success with 4, obviously. So like, yes, I trash on the game because the game genuinely is not good. But like, I had my best memories there, right? Because when you grow up, those are typically what you have labeled in your mind as your best memories via nostalgia or like something else. But like, yeah, I had the
Yeah,
most fun with 4 for sure.
Yeah,
yeah,
when we were going through our timeline episode a couple episodes ago, like I was really thinking about that because I clown on 4 very often just because it doesn't agree with a lot of the things that I like in fighting games.
Yeah,
There are other aspects of it that are great, that are good, objectively good fighting game mechanics that I'm not a fan of, but uh, it was really difficult to like you had to separate that between the sheer amount of positive and good memories that came from that era of the community. Like even now you were talking about your OC scene, right? Like that was a very hyper specific slice in even the
exactly.
Street Fighter 4 timeline. That was vanilla only, right? And that
That
was
was super. That was super too.
oh, vanilla and,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
the beginning of Super 2, right? Like that
Yeah.
that's actually that was my peak for Street Fighter 4, or when I was first learning Street Fighter 4 as well. And so I can look back on that game and be like, that was a shitty game. Like it just relied on a lot on Vortex, and I
Yep.
abused that and I didn't learn shit from it. But at the same time, like some of my favorite memories that we've discussed on this podcast are from that era. And it changed this. Changed the community. It
Yeah.
changed my life.
yeah,
Yeah. I will always say objectively, if you look at it from a game standpoint, 5 is 100% better than 4. 4 is like a bunch of crap thrown together, and like people like did an RNG number indicator for frame data and went like, this sweep will be minus 16, but this sweep will be plus 7. And it's like, where did you come up with this garbage? Like, I don't understand why Honda sweep is plus, then Gokin sweep is 6 frames. It's like, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. So,
Benny, I didn't put him up to this, by the way. I know, I know you like
I mean,
four.
I mean, Betty knows. I'm sure he abused the fact that his standing low is like positive on block. It's a ridiculous concept. So like
Ah,
when
yes.
5 made it all consistent, they made it easier and they made a lot of system mechanics more oppressive and difficult for like quote unquote people to play neutral in. I'll never defend the first package of 5. 5 when it first came out is the worst game in video game history, right? For
Yeah,
what it
it's
came
pretty
out
bad.
as, it was the worst game ever created in the history of man. It's terrible. I would never recommend it, and that's why it sunk its like enthusiasm for 2 years. But the version it is now is the best modern day Street Fighter since Third Strike.
I agree with that, and I think it's better than Third Strike.
I think it's better than Third Strike too,
Um,
and that would draw like a lot of ire, right? Like it would draw a lot of people being like, these guys
yeah,
have no idea what they're talking about. But then also I would then refute by saying, have you played Street Fighter 5? And have you played it without the level of bias that you came into within the first
yeah,
year of its release? Because yes, system mechanics did make it so that it was oppressive, but now the system mechanics as it is presented now have provided you enough resources to go both ways. Like you do not get
yeah.
oppressed in that game anymore.
if you could
And
go
I'm
back and
hoping,
if you could go back in time and change one thing about launch Street Fighter 5 to make it better, however you define better,
oh my
what
god,
would you do?
there's so much shit though, man. I mean, like, oh, I mean, honestly, like, I would even change the system mechanics. I thought they were terrible, and they are. But if you're talking about the one thing I would change is that there needed to be single player content. There needed to be something
Yeah,
more than the base bone, like the bare bones crap that they gave you. The root kit
yeah.
aside, the
Yep.
root kit aside,
Ooh,
all right.
Yep.
The online
yeah,
was at least playable, but the root kit aside, that was terrible. But if there was
Yep.
actual single player content that they promised and then
yeah,
delivered, the game would be completely different than it was now because you would still have a lot of the same kind of enthusiasm from casual fans that would
yep,
exist maybe a year past the line. And that is
Yeah.
Street Fighter in a nutshell. The only way this series has any life is if there is casual fans uplifting it, because the hardcore fans are
Yeah.
1%,
Yep,
right?
Yep.
It
that's true.
shouldn't appease to me. I'm the hardcore fan. It should appease to the guy who only knows 5 characters.
Yep.
Do you think that
Yeah.
there's a
That's a
design flaw, like a fundamental design flaw in five for that reason, though? Because five, with the frame data standardized and everything, is geared towards that 1% and not to the casuals, right?
No, I think the 5 when it came out was geared toward casuals because you could kill somebody in 3 hits.
Yeah, well, you could throw loop them, yeah.
yeah.
That's
Right,
true.
but you could also do like birdie
Yeah,
stand medium punch into headbutt super, and that did 65%. So like there was
true.
that level of execution barrier that was deleted. So you no longer had to do these one frame links or these jump cancel loops or whatever used to exist. The
Yeah.
barrier crashing was huge, and like most people would not like that if they were a hardcore fan, but I personally felt like it was necessary. Like you
Okay.
needed to have this, right? Like you needed to have some sort of execution barrier crushed because otherwise the accessibility for future generations would not exist. Nobody wants to grind in training mode for 11 hours a day, all right? Like nobody wants to do that shit anymore.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
We're in a TikTok era, right? Like
TikTok. Yeah, for
I
sure.
don't get I never get why people say like, "Oh, execution this, execution that." It's like that existed 20 years ago when all we had was satellite TV being the biggest technology that we had to like divert our attention. When newspapers were prosperous, right? Like nowadays it's a 7 second or less attention span. And if you can't
Yeah.
appease to that, then you're not going to survive. Like most of these huge AAA titles have like a shelf life of like 6 months
Yeah.
at maybe
Exactly.
best.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned TikTok era because like I saw something that was really kind of interesting to me in terms of like music scene nowadays. And it was a clip of some guy at his concert, right, trying to get the crowd to to sing along his song, right?
Yeah,
And like, if you look back at like older generations, right, like you see them singing the whole song. Like, I don't know, one thing I always think about is like Linkin Park. There's like this some European concert, and like, you hear the crowd, and the crowd is just singing like the whole song, right?
yeah, yeah.
Singing in the end, and then it's like everybody knows the words. And like for this particular like Twitter clip, it was like the guy like, all right, here's this part, and like they do the chorus, and then like he asked them, all right, the next part, and they don't know it, and they're just like, and it's like it's interesting because it's like nowadays, like you said, it's the TikTok era. People get used to hearing like the viral part or what the part is
Right.
in the clip
The
all the
chorus,
time.
the
Like
hook.
whereas like years ago, like for me, like if I was listening to the radio, I didn't have CDs or whatever. It was like I would hear that whole song and that top 40 song all the time, all the way through. Like you would eventually just know the lyrics to
Memorize it.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
nowadays, like you don't have that.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, the attention span, like, yeah, like, I mean, I'm the same way too. Like, I look at videos and like, if it's like more than like 2 minutes, I'm like, man, I don't have time for this. Like, come on, give me
I
some
personally watch
shorter
30-minute
content.
videes. I love 30-minute videos.
Me too.
I'm glad. Yeah, I have not downloaded TikTok for this explicit reason, so that my
I
attention
don't have it
span is
either,
still an old man. Like I still want like I want to keep my old man attention span.
I,
but
I don't download TikTok because I don't want to give my data to the CCP.
Fair enough. I mean, even to your point, Benny. I mean, like even without just having the hook or the chorus being catchy, the newer songs have so many samples now that it
yeah,
doesn't even have like you know what I mean. Like in the '90s and 2000s, a lot of songs just had the one sample and then they would
yeah,
repeat, and then that would be like the backing track, right? You would just hear the one sample, and then that would loop, and that was it. Nowadays, you have like
yeah,
4 samples in one song, and you're like, what are you trying to appease to? Like, I don't get
yeah,
why you have like this, and then this, and then this, and you switch it up, and then the beat switches up, and then it's a different sample. It's like
yeah,
even the song producers are like understanding of the lack of attention now. So
So like
yeah.
that's a fantastic analogy, right? And so if we were to take that and apply that to fighting games, like, what would be the equivalent of the chorus that everybody knows that would show up in every TikTok, really? Like for a fighting game, you know?
I would say just like the standard move set. Like to
I'd say
me,
V
like,
Trigger. I would say V Trigger.
Comebacks, basically.
Yeah, huge
oh,
comebacks. Yeah.
Okay.
hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I would say like the standard move set because I think like if you've played fighting games, like even casuals nowadays, like you might get to the point to where it's just like I know how to do fireball motion. I know how to do this dragon punch motion or whatever, and it's like I don't know. It's it's something weird. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's just like it depends on like what your upbringing was and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Right.
like I feel like combos are really flashy, right? So like a good example is Street Fighter 6 right now, right? Everyone's talking about Kimberly, and she looks flashy because like those are the things that you see first, right? The big combos, the jump cancels, the into supers, and the air resets, the mix ups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But then like a whiff punish doesn't get that same like viral
That
viral
same
thing.
gravitas. Yeah, the same
Yeah,
gravitas.
unless it's attached to a 60% combo that Ryu did.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the
So
thing is,
Right.
even with that, I mean, like, even like juggling on that point, Kimberly's best combos are like 14 hits. So even the combo system is diluted to the point where you don't even have these like long running numbers anymore, right? Like we
yeah.
get fascinated whenever we see like Chun Li do 45 hits, and you're like, what the hell is this? It just doesn't exist in modern day fighting games anymore. You just don't see this level of combo intricacy, for lack of a better term. But like that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just
Yeah.
the times that we're living in, right?
So where's your line on that, Tim? Like for like the hitbox, debate is has been raging for months now,
Are we
right?
talking about
And
controller debates?
yeah, the controller debate as far as like because we
I
could talk
I
about execution and its role
I
in,
mean,
in
yeah,
the game,
just
right?
I'm on the Brian F train. He mentioned about like how everything should be accessible because
Yeah.
it's not up to us to determine the line. It's up to the developer to determine the line. Like if the developer puts it into the system mechanics that you can't do simultaneous inputs, then there we go. There's your problem solved. It's not up to us, right? Like it should be up to the developer. We shouldn't be the ones dictating what peripheral is legal and whatnot. So if you checked on six's beta, you can't do simultaneous direction. So already they have heard the community. You can't do left right at the same time. So the hitbox thing that you could do, where you can walk and block, does not exist anymore in six.
Oh, okay. I'm playing on a hitbox where the firmware does that. So you're
Yeah,
saying that the software also reflects that on keyboard and stuff like
exactly.
that
If you
too?
go into training
Cool.
mode or whatnot and you do forward and back, it will
Yeah.
not reflect. It will
But
just move forward.
but down and up does takes last input, right? Like up takes priority over down still.
Yep.
Yeah.
So like they have addressed that. Like people, either the devs that have, because that's why I'm so like
It
big on
still
the
won't be
faith.
good enough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people will argue because they want to argue. My whole
Yeah.
issue was like whether or not the peripheral gives you such an unfair edge that it's
yeah,
beyond human compensation, right? Like it's beyond comprehension is what I mean. So like
yeah,
if obviously if you're doing it, that was my biggest question was like could it block for you essentially? Like is it are you able to walk and block quicker than if you were able to use something else? And if the answer was like yes, you were
Yes.
always able to walk and block better, then yeah, it's probably an unfair advantage. But at the same time, if it's allowed and the system mechanics allow it, then I have nothing to say. It's not really up to me, right? Because like the game says that you can do that. So who am I to argue against the game? I'm
It
just
makes
playing
me
it.
it makes me think a lot about like those adaptive controllers that Microsoft makes, where they're like
Yeah.
they're
Okay.
specifically configurable buttons for people that have disabilities and can't reach certain buttons.
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, and I wonder, what the response would be if somebody were to try and play on one of those, and it would be a
yeah,
person to person, case by case scenario because then people would be judging based on the disability,
Yeah.
yeah,
and
Which
like
would still be valid, right? But you have to have some sort of like you have to have a reason for it. I feel like the Hertz monitor stuff and overclocking your system is more cheating than it is the peripheral. I think that's more of an advantageous situation and that should be checked on. Like if your hardware is 2 times better than your opponent and you're able to see frames almost like way clearer, and obviously we're talking about like very very small minute details, but in a fighting game those
yeah,
are like life and death situations. So if like
yeah,
Arturo, obviously because he's the subject matter here, obviously, I mean like it's implied. If he's running on 200 hertz or he's running on like 300 frames per second and he's got his shit overclocked and I'm running on 60 at max, he's going to beat me a lot of the times in situations where it's life or death because he's seeing these scenarios almost like a fraction of a second faster than me. And that is an advantage that does not have any counterplay. That's just
yeah,
impossible to counterplay. Whereas if somebody's walking and blocking, okay, they're walking and blocking. But if they're doing a combo that's like pure optimal and I can't reach it and they get 6 more damage than me, to me, I don't give a shit. 6 more damage for all that work, you deserve it,
yeah,
yeah,
right?
there's the smokescreen around the hitbox debate to me is less around like because everyone gets all upset about the directions and whether or not you can block, or you can hold two different directions at once, and whether or not SOCD versus same direction or stuff like
Yeah,
that kind
yeah.
of stuff. Like, but the real benefit to hitbox that like is the gray area for the ethical cheating part is the movement, like you said, the dashing and stuff. Because
Yes.
what you're doing is you're creating new scenarios where people ordinarily would not expect to dash, and now they do. So it's like if your character wiggles a certain way, ordinarily you could that's a tell and that's a giveaway for a dash. Like if they duck or something, right? Because then you could tell
Sure.
that's
Or a
somebody dragging
buffer
their
or a
stick,
buffer.
right?
Right.
Right, but for a hitbox, you can mask that, and you can actually like do a double tap with two
Right.
fingers and do all that bullshit. So like that is that blows up people that are trying to react to everything because it's just brand new data, brand new scenarios that they
It's an
now have to
unreactable
account for.
situation. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So those things, that kind of stuff would be like the best things to address, and that would be like the, oh, that should be a bannable offense type of thing. But like for me, in my opinion, if it's allowed in the game, it's allowed in the game. So like that's my issue. I genuinely do believe the overclocking stuff is more egregious than that, because I just feel like there's no
Yeah.
way somebody should be reacting 0.5 seconds faster than me. All right, this is a
Yeah.
40-year-old man reacting better than me. There's no fucking way that should exist.
Oh
Hey,
man.
Benny,
Right? There's
Benny, this is the first time we've talked about the overclocking and hertzing thing on this podcast. Have you had any thoughts about that since watching old man Scott go in on Twitter and stuff too?
Well, I mean, for somebody that turned 40 myself this year,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, like, it's not something that I would personally invest in. I mean, unless I had just had more disposable income, but like, it's not something that
it's not worth
I'm
the
personally
investment.
too worried. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't feel it is. I mean, I agree with you in terms of like the advantages that it brings, especially like in the online arena, because
sure.
it's just like that's not an even playing field, literally, right? Like John's setup could be twice as better than mine, and he's going to have those advantages that I don't have in the
Hmm.
offline world. If we go to TGZ, if we go to whatever, we got to plan the same setup regardless. I
Right.
can't use that as an excuse. But in the online world, which is something that yeah, John's talked about as being very dominant now, and potentially the gateway or the way forward with the after COVID and everything, this could be there's a lot more people playing online. Like it essentially in a way it becomes like pay to win, like he said. Like if there's
Exactly.
that much of an advantage for those guys, the guys that are investing are going to have that little bit of an advantage.
Right, right, right. And it's like this never really existed in the forum that we were used to, because
Yeah,
it was more like, is this your day job or it's not your day job? The advantages have always been like, how much time did you put into the game to become the player that you are? Now it doesn't
yeah,
even matter anymore. Now it's to the point where it's like, are you spending 2,000 on your monitor, and are you
yeah,
overclocking your system to maximum capacity so that way you can have that extra bit of advantage? And if that comes into play in a tournament, and I'm reacting as quickly as I can with the system mechanics and the requirements that I have, and it's just not good enough, like I said, that is not a counterplayable situation.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's more egregious than having a controller that allows me to hold down charge and jump at the same time, so I can do stand light kick and the fucking flash kick, right? Like, I just feel like that doesn't have that much of an advantage unless it's the absolute tippy top highest level. Whereas in this case, this is like all the way down to the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, and yeah, and it goes in hand directly, like what you were saying in terms of like the barrier to entry in terms of execution, right? Like the
Yeah,
games have gotten easier. Like
right.
six, like I mean, there's still going to be stuff that's like execution heavy, but like from the videos that I saw, like I think that's more to appease the people that want to do those kind of things.
Yeah,
Whereas I don't feel like it's necessarily optimal, because like I was looking at people's combos, and unless they were using level threes, like it was like, yeah, you could drive rush this and do this, but is it worth spending all that meter and doing this for
yeah, like
an
two drive
extra
rushes in one
500?
combo, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
Yeah, so it's
I
just like it goes hand in hand with that. Like if you have if you have to spend less time learning like how to do optimal stuff in the game,
Right.
then those hardware advantages are going to be they're going to be stronger.
Yep.
I think the nuance of the situation is about, you know, whether or not the delay or the advantage matters. Because, like, for a lot of us, like the common like counter argument to, well, rather let me put it this way, for the folks that are championing like high refresh rates and lower overclocking USB ports and stuff like that, the advantage is that you have low latency, and low latency is objectively better for fighting games. And so that requires that's like the core axiom of the argument is faster reactions better for the fighting game. And some people actually will argue that that's not always the case. Like if you can react to everything, then you actually get rid of some of the committal behind fighting games, right? And that's fun. It's part of the fun stuff. But the problem is when people say like, you know, I don't really want to partake in this high refresh rate stuff. It's not a good advantage, or it's not fair or whatever. You know, that tells people that input latency doesn't matter. And then we get that argument conflated too, because then people get angry and they're like, oh, input latency does actually matter. It's a huge part of like why Street Fighter V failed, in my opinion. Like basically all these different arguments get
thrown together,
this, right? Yeah.
The biggest issue, in my opinion, with the overclocking stuff is that people that have that system mechanic or whatever, they have that advantage, they'll just say like, hey, you have accessibility to it as well.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
because
true.
It's not like I'm doing something or I'm learning a new skill. I'm just making sure that my shit is like up to speed. And like that's something that you could also do too. And then obviously there's no real counter argument to that besides like, hey, I'm broke. Right? Like but like that's a pretty good argument in my opinion. My whole thing is like if it just allows you to have that huge of an advantage, you gotta have some sort of regulation. I get it. You want to be optimal, but like that's not accessible to everybody, in my opinion. It's just simply not. So having some sort of regulation, you could still have them have a high end situation and having them have some sort of advantage with that, but you can't have it to the point where it's clearly being put out right now, where it's just so ridiculous, where it's almost like a couple of frames of an advantage. Like he's able to react to stuff that he shouldn't be because Father Time told him he can't, right? Like, so how are you, you know what I mean? How are you to like absolutely perplex science to the point where technology just absolutely trumps that, right? So I think when that kind of argument comes into play, we got an issue here, right? So
also, but I and then like the parallel with the hitbox debate is like, okay, so you're using a tool to help you, triumph over a human disadvantage. Like what?
Sure.
How? Like that same logic, I guess, could be applied to hitbox as well.
It could be. It could be. I just don't think that the counterplay for people doing hitbox stuff is as impossible as somebody who's reacting to you a second earlier. Like that's like you're playing on 200 ping and they're playing on 0. The advantage of that is like 2.5 seconds, right? Like it's not as egregious as that, but it is almost at the point where it could border on that. I'll tell you this much: if I play Art right now and he's playing on his overclocked stuff and I'm playing on my maximum 60 hertz monitor, I'm getting washed because he's going to see stuff that I'm not going to see yet. You know what I mean? How are you able to predict the future? There's no way. And nothing about the hitbox allows you to predict the future. It just makes it so that you have the ability to walk and block better, which I think is still cheap, but cheap isn't broken, right? There's a difference. There's a cheap situation and a broken situation. And that's what I think the argument is. The system designs allow you to have some sort of advantages with the hitbox, but there's also advantages with the stick that the hitbox won't have. Like my quarter circles are going to be a little bit better, or my half circles are going to be a little bit better. So like there are stuff that I can do to compensate. And are you able to play better footsies because you're able to walk and block? No. What if I was just a better footsie player? I'll just beat you then. I'll whip punish you. It is what it is. You'll lose regardless. But if you're able to react a second earlier, it doesn't matter how much better than I am in a neutral situation because you're able to see things that I'm not able to see yet.
Yeah. There's one thing I've learned from like playing Street Fighter 6 in the past at the recent beta. It's been that people are going to find a reason for no matter what you do. If you win, people are going to find a reason for why you won. And lately, it's been I can do shit that nobody else can do on hitbox, and they don't know what I can do. They just know that I can, and therefore
they just know that you have accessibility to a combo that they don't have.
Yeah, they don't even know what that combo is. It's just not fair. So, all right,
I get it.
I don't know. People always find reasons for that. Like I was just thinking about that too, and you were talking about the Hertz thing, and I'm like, give me my reason, give me my excuse, right? So if I lose, I'm just like, hey, what's your setup?
That's good.
Like,
that's good.
Send me your specs. Or I looked up your specs. I saw this Facebook post. This is the stuff you're running. Like, come on, that's why you're winning. Like, get out of here.
Man, are we gonna take that to the complete other end of the spectrum and be like, I only play PS4 players?
I mean, it really could be that because of the specs that they're running is the reason why they're winning as consistently like as they are.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're getting into like lag switch territory where this person's loading a fucking Pornhub video during my combo.
he's got a hack to make sure that he lags every single time I hit a combo. Yeah, you can do that.
I am interested, Tim, in what's your stance on PC? PC being the console of choice or the system of choice
Yeah,
for
so this
competitive
has
play.
been a discussion. Funny enough, before we run out of time, obviously, but like this has been a discussion that has happened almost like 15 years now at this point, right?
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
first person, in my opinion, who has done this discussion to advance the FGC forward is Alex Valle, right? Valle brought in all these Alienware computers back in Wednesday Night Fights. He was the one that wanted to make this as an official like peripheral and like sponsorship because he understood that there's no way this FGC shit doesn't stagnate if all that we have for sponsorship is ramen and Mad Cats, right? There was just no way. There's no growth. It stagnates.
What
But
are you
if we
talking
could
about? Mad
bring
Cats is forever, man.
yeah, so forever that they went bankrupt and then they came back as a weird small ass company. But like if you introduce PCs to it, and this is like I'm very passionate about this subject too, is that if you introduce PCs to the scene, you automatically get almost accessibility to every single top tier esports sponsorship deals. You know what I mean? We're not just like relying on HyperX anymore. We could then talk
Yeah.
about like Corsair, and we have never had
Yeah.
Corsair as a sponsorship. Why would they ever come in? Because they don't make sticks, they don't
Yeah.
make headphones, or they
Right.
do, but they don't make it as prominently as like HyperX does. So like
Yeah.
you get these like huge companies that come in to provide keyboards, speakers, monitors, you
Yep.
know, cases. I know the PC. There's a little bit of a PC building company that like sponsored Smug for a little bit too, but like that's
Okay.
only because of the pandemic, right? Because he's stuck at home and he's a streamer.
Yeah.
But like, why don't we have that as a commonplace for everything? So my stance is very simple. PC should have been the damn standard years ago.
Yeah.
It just didn't do well because Valle is so complicated as a figure, right? Valle takes 2 steps forward and then 2 steps back.
Okay.
So he stays in the same stupid lane. The thing is, he's so knowledgeable about this stuff, but he doesn't. He's always missing like one extra step, and I can't give him
Just
the
like
extra step because I don't have the expertise in it either. The
Yeah.
Alienware thing is brilliant, right? If you think about it, that
Okay.
Alienware sponsorship deal was brilliant because like that's him progressing the scene forward.
Yeah,
And he was
trying to do something, right? Yeah.
exactly. He was trying to provide extra incentive and specialization for a community that was so specialized, right?
So
Expanding our our borders is like the correct play.
so
Good.
what about that? Like what went south there? That
Yeah,
it
because he's
didn't.
short-sighted. Because he does enough of the legwork to realize he's a pioneer, but not enough of the legwork to deem him as hardworking. So like I'll explain what I mean.
Okay.
Pioneer obviously means that you have the idea. You got to be innovative in order to do that. That makes you a pioneer.
Yeah.
So he's ahead of the curve. Short-sighted, not hardworking. He did not he did not go over the issue of like everybody having different peripherals, and he didn't clock every single Alienware system to the same system specs, so everything was inconsistent. And he didn't figure out why it took so much power or why it wouldn't take because Alienware at the time was only good name only. So he didn't even go for the correct sponsorship for PC. He went for the only sponsorship that he felt like he could afford. So instead of going for a PC that was clearly better, because Alienware was not good, he could have gone for a better PC because that's the best idea. PC was the correct idea, but the actual sponsorship for Alienware, not the best idea. And they gave him garbage tech, and it wasn't clocked correctly for everything. Every peripheral was different, so it didn't have that same like system. So everything, whenever they put the stick in and they did all the button checks, it was inconsistent. It took too long. So that Wednesday
Yeah.
night fight, the first time they did it, took like 17 hours because it
Right.
was just like
Yeah, I
nothing
remember.
was correct. And so,
So-
like,
But that's
why
the thing,
didn't they
though.
troubleshoot this shit?
Nobody had ever done that before in the scene, right? Nobody had ever
Yeah.
even knew that there was going to be mass
Nobody-
problems with
yeah.
USB controllers
Right.
on these setups, right? Because I imagine he would just assume that it worked like a console, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
but that's an issue,
That's
right?
that's the downfall. Yeah.
Exactly. That's having a great idea, but why wouldn't you test run your idea?
Exactly. Yeah.
That
That's
makes no
what I was
sense.
gonna say. Like, yeah, because that's
To me, that
I
is
feel
the
like
test
that's
run.
something.
Like
No,
to me,
but
that
you
is
shouldn't
the
have
test run.
You shouldn't have the tournament be the test run. It didn't go on for just 1 week. It went on for like months, and it never
Yeah.
got better. It
Mm.
never got better. That's why Alienware was dropped as the sponsorship. But the thing is, like, it shouldn't have been Alienware to begin with. It should have been something better. Even Intel at the time was better for PC specs. Even Intel was better for like optimization and speed. And
Real
you
quick,
get
we're going to
more
take a sponsor
accessibility.
break. We're going to take a sponsor break. We're brought to you by
Intel.
Alienware. and it's
There we go, there we go. But like back then, right? We're talking like 2012, 2013-ish when he did the
Yeah,
whole Alienware pivot. It just made sense from an ideology like
Hmm.
standpoint, but it didn't make sense
yeah,
from an execution standpoint because he just didn't do that extra
yeah,
fucking step, and
yeah.
that's
You
why I was
see,
like so frustrated by it.
yeah, yeah. See, that's the thing too, because like you have to think about that in the grand scheme of things, is because people will remember situations like that. Like I understand, like John, you were saying, why can't that be the test run or that's the test run? But like, if it's me as a TO, there's no way in hell I'm gonna like put on my main event and be like, all right, you know what, we're doing PCs now for the next 3 months while we figure this out.
Yeah,
You know what I
it makes
mean?
sense
Like,
if it's a weekly. Obviously, he's doing it as a test run, like John mentioned, and maybe he did test run it, and maybe he did play test it, but it really just didn't feel that way when it
yeah,
first came up. It just didn't feel that way. It was too chaotic. Everything took too long. Every stick took a million years to configure, and
yeah.
like every system was inconsistent with its lag. Like it just they're the same freaking PCs. How could they be inconsistent? Because you know what I mean. Like there just wasn't enough test run.
I mean, to me, it's a wallflower problem, right? Where like Valle tried it, nobody else tried it, it
Right.
bombed, and now nobody else wants to try it for the reasons you
Right.
named, Benny, which is, I
Yeah.
don't want to put my name on a major that's going to go south, so that's probably why you aren't seeing, like, the combo breaker people even try, right?
Right.
And so they're
Exactly.
waiting
It's
for
gonna.
it's like when penguins line up at the edge of a glacier to push, and they push one off to see if there's a sea lion at the bottom. It's that.
Yeah.
And Valle
Yeah.
got eaten by a sea lion 10 years
Yeah, but the thing
ago.
is, like,
Yeah.
you have to give Valle the credit, right? Because he was
Right.
the
Exactly.
only
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he
person to
tried.
innovate.
Yeah.
Yeah. He tried.
He
Yeah.
really
That's why,
did
like,
try.
it's funny you even bring this topic up because like that's actually something that I'm gonna look. I was gonna look into recently because there's been some new like esports areas or what do you call them now? Land cafes still? What do you?
I
But
guess. I
there's
guess.
yeah, but there's some of those that are opening up near me, and I've from what I saw on their Facebook posts, like they're interested in doing like fight nights and stuff like that. So I was gonna start maybe checking them out one day and just kind of seeing like, hey, are you guys planning to do like Street Fighter 6, and trying to like start something small because like you said, like I don't think there's gonna be any kind of like majors that are gonna do that until
Right.
they have a chance to really kind of see how things get ironed out. But I think it's really gonna start with some of the smaller scenes. Like if I can get 8 to 10 people to go to like a tournament and be like, hey, I'm gonna try, I want to try running tournaments on PC here. Just please, bear with me. And on a smaller scale, it's a lot easier to deal with than to be like, hey, we've got 65 people at this tournament. Everybody come here and like, oh shit, we're running
Right.
for 12 hours now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
I
I
mean,
mean
Valle
that's
even
that's
had
something I'm
a
gonna look at.
Valle had a tweet. Speaking of him, right? He had a tweet that said like, "Hey, who would want to do some offline PC sessions?" So I think
No,
he's starting to get back on this piggyback wagon. It took him 12 years to finally get the courage back up, but like this is the step that needs to be taken. It shouldn't.
yeah,
We should not be console standard. Console standard is so bad. Like it doesn't make any sense why we're even relegated and restricted to console. The only
yeah,
reason why we're doing that is because Capcom was sponsored by Sony, right? So like it had to be PlayStation.
yeah.
But if
But
you look at it
is it
from,
really driven solely by Capcom though? Like
I mean,
we're not
Street
the
Fighter,
only.
the FGC is driven by Street Fighter. I don't know. I don't know who's
Yeah.
told you differently.
I mean, Mortal Kombat sells more in terms of like the casuals, but it's just like in terms of like the tournaments. Like, yeah, I feel like wherever Street Fighter goes, like that's where the scene goes.
Exactly. If Street
Like,
Fighter
it doesn't
dies, the
matter.
community will die.
Do
Yeah,
you, so I don't know, like as somebody who's gone through this, like, what are we now, episode 17 of this podcast, like Street
Sure.
Fighter is a huge part of the fighting game community to the point where it defines like our eras and stuff. Like the
Uh
dark
huh.
era is just when all the Capcom games were shitty, right? Um,
yeah,
but like
No, there was just no new Capcom game. It was
there were no
it was a
new
third.
Capcom
Yeah.
games, but there were plenty of 3D games, and the Tekken scene's doing fine. The Versus scene's Arc System Works is killing it. Like
Sure.
yeah,
I don't know if I genuinely don't know if Street Fighter really holds that same power
So
anymore.
here's the thing. I believe it genuinely does. Right.
Sure.
The spikes for Arc Systems is huge. Right. The first year for Dragon Ball Fighters, the best fucking launch of any game. Period. Right. The first
mhm,
launch of Strive, incredible. Right. But since then, what is carrying the scene's excitement?
But the scene is what I'm talking
I
about.
mean,
Where
yeah,
that's the 1% that we were talking about. It's the hardcore
yeah.
audience only. Like it doesn't really.
But that's the FGC. We're talking about the FGC, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, maybe I'm losing
If we're
my
talking about
focus.
casuals, Benny's correct. Mortal Kombat absolutely outsells every single game. But
Hmm.
then right after that, it's Capcom, it's Street Fighter.
Mm.
Yeah, I think so.
Street
Yeah.
Fighter always does either the best or the second best after a Mortal Kombat game because those are the two iconic franchises that everybody knows about. If
Yeah.
I go up
But
to a random person on the street,
I think Tekken actually did really well.
yeah, maybe. I just don't think the casual people pick up Tekken that much. And like, if I go up to them asking who
Yeah, I
Jin
think
is,
you're right. Yeah, yeah, you're
they'll be
right.
like, "Who the hell is Jin?" They'll just be like, "I don't. I'm not an alcoholic, right?" Like they'll just be like, "I don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah, exactly. Or is it, oh, do you know who this is? The ninja guy with the yellow. Oh yeah, I know
Exactly.
Yeah.
Scorpion. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can't.
Or
You
like,
can't.
or you know Ryu and Ken. Obviously, they know who Ryu
You
and
can't
Ken
call him
is.
Ryu though. You got to call him Ryu. Otherwise, the old guy's not
Maybe,
gonna get
maybe,
it.
maybe.
No, this is like this is another thing that has a huge parallel in my life, the whole PC thing, because like what just happened over the weekend was the classic Tetris World Championships.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
they play, of all things, they play on an NES and a CRT and one controller. The NES old controller, right? That's the barrier to entry. And there's a we're at a point now where the kids that are playing are doing things that were basically considered humanly impossible, 5-6 years ago,
Right.
right? And to me, like as a player and as a spectator, things have gotten stale because it's just like you guys have hit like peak performance for what this game can do and what you guys can do, and there's been a lot of discussion about like growing that scene. And me and Scott have talked about this because he's followed that scene a little bit too, and like we're both in agreement that it needs to move to like a newer platform, because like in the recent years, Tetris Effect came out, and that's available on modern platforms, Steam, all the consoles, everything, right?
Yeah.
And there's a classic mode in there that it's not, it might not be perfect and whatever, but it's good enough, I think, to move to a more modern platform. And I mean, I don't know what it's going to take, because like I feel like there's a lot of people that are kind of stuck in like, well, we want to use the original hardware and the CRTs. And
Right.
that kind of goes in the, there's a parallel with that with like the Third Strike scene, right? Like
Right. Right.
I think
Right.
we were talking to
Or
Scott about
ST
that.
or
And
even ST.
yeah, and like yeah, they were using like the misters at Evo.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And Scott is like, nobody could tell the difference. But then you have people that are just like, no, like that's not that's not what we want to work with, right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, but you're limiting accessibility to your game and to the growth of your game by staying with those kind of old standards. Like,
Right.
I mean, PCs, everybody has a PC. I mean, whether it's high end or not, I mean, that's different. But I mean, you still have access to a PC. Imagine, if I say, hey, do you want to play in this Tetris tournament? And you're like, oh, what do I need for it? Oh, you need to go buy an NES. You need to go buy a CRT, and you get to use this old rectangular controller, which is not ergonomic at all, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna give you hand
And it's just
problems.
versus it's like, yeah, John, hey John, you want to play Tetris Effect? You want to play in this Tetris tournament? Oh, what do you mean? Oh, you can get this game on Steam. You can use your
Switch.
keyboard. You can use whatever the hell you want. You got a Switch, yeah, Xbox, whatever. Like it opens up the community
Exactly.
to a whole lot more. And like that's where I stand with the PC thing. I think it's definitely the way to go, and like it'll get more people involved than kind of sticking to the whole console thing. I mean, I understand like the cost from like a TO or like a venue standpoint is going to be something that's, you know, they want the simple, right? The plug and play. But if you want things to grow, if you want people to start playing more, like get more people involved into the scene. I think yeah, PC is definitely the way to go.
So, like, one thing I'm really curious about the future of the Tetris situation in particular is, you know, we can talk about what's best for the community and talk about like what people are going to be willing to accept and whether or not the old people are going to let go of their old ways, the new people are going to whether new people are going to take it too far. Like, there's all those kinds of questions that come into play, but it does
Yeah.
still come down to like, what if Sony just swoops in and says we're going to give the classic Tetris championship a bunch of PS5s, and then you have to play Tetris Effect on PS5? Like, there's nothing
Yeah.
stopping them from just doing that, and then everybody going with it. So we can debate like the I don't want to call it ethical, but like the philosophical portions around this stuff. But ultimately, if
Yeah,
somebody some dude in a suit writes a check somewhere, like that's
Yeah.
where we're at.
Exactly. Yeah. No, yeah, true. Yeah. Like, yeah. I mean, yeah, if you get that console sponsor, then yeah, for sure. Like
Yep.
it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, well, why did you sell out? But it's like at the same time, it's like trying to move this scene
Yeah.
to something more
Forward. You
modern.
gotta move
And
it forward.
these are the guys that were willing to front the money for it and supply us these setups and everything.
So if you had control over the Tekken community, or not Tekken, sorry, Tetris community, if you had to make that decision, and Sony came to you with a fucking truckload of cash, And would you stick to your guns on PC? Do you think the Tetris community would take that and go?
Well, I don't know if I would. I don't know if I'd stick to my guns on PC, just because I feel like it's more like just modernizing the community more than anything, right? Because I feel like I mean, like I said, that was like the biggest parallel was the third strike thing, right? Like you want to play third strike, you got to play on our cabs and play with sticks. You're not gonna put in these undammed decoders and play with your hitbox or your controllers or your pads. Like you got to learn on stick. You got to learn our way, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
And so like I guess I'm more on this fact of just moving to like a more modern platform. So I think
Yeah.
that situation's different, or that scene's a little different in that
They're
sense.
they're they're a little behind with the FGC's issue
well,
is because the FGC issue is trying to move on from console, right? Like
no,
so we're just
that's the important thing is they're behind, so they have the opportunity to avoid making the same mistakes that we did,
don't
which
make
is
the
we
same
got in
mistakes.
bed with the console groups, right? And that's why we're in the situation we're in.
I mean, we're in the situation because we have no money, and Sony was like, "Here's money."
Yeah, that's fair.
So like when you
Yeah,
mentioned that to Benny, like would you not do a PC thing if there was a console deal? That's exactly what happened. They took the
yeah,
console deal because Eva wanted to be bought out because of all the bad publicity, but also because of a lack of deals and sponsorships because we have done a lack of moving forward. The only deals available to us are only console deals. So like if we don't
yeah.
even get started with the PC thing and all we have to remember it is Via's terrible failed experiment, of course we're never going to move forward. We're never
Yeah.
going to have Steel Series. I want to be sponsored by Steel Series. You know what I'm saying?
I don't
Yeah.
want to be sponsored by Steel Series. Their name
No,
is
Well,
too
I,
similar to
I mean,
mine.
the only good
Dude,
sponsorship the FGC has had is Pocky.
the sheer amount of people that were like, Spiral Series looks like Steel Series, and then my logo looked like the Steel Series logo. I was just so bummed out, man.
Well, then you know what I mean. That's your fault. But
Yeah,
then
yeah,
again, if they get into the community, now you'll just have the same argument that you made to me. Are you Shiggle BMX or are you JL Tim? You know what I'm saying? That's a callback for you.
Very
Oh man,
cool.
he has a good point, John.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean to answer your question, like I mean, given that option between like, hey, do you guys want to stay where you're at? Like I know you're looking at the PC, but I'll give you all this kind of money and provide you with setups and monitors and
Right.
modern controllers and Brook adapters so people can use whatever controllers they want. I would be like, okay, yeah, I'll take that because to me that's still a step forward from where
That's
they're at.
right. That's what I'm saying. Like that
For the FGC,
example
that's different. Yeah,
exactly. If we get another deal from Sony for exclusivity, that's a step backwards, in my
yeah,
opinion. Because you're
that's
just
how I
going
see it.
for a floor. Why aren't we going for the ceiling? I'm so
Yeah,
tired of floor plays, man. Like I'm a gambler, right? I'm a DFS player. I'm a fantasy player. I'm so sick of chalk. I'm so sick of it. I don't want floor plays. I want to reach for the stars. Why am I not trying to
yeah,
win stuff? You know what I mean? The ceiling is where you win. The floor is when you stay
yeah,
steady. We've already seen where this goes. We've seen the expanse
yeah,
of what Sony can provide for us. We've seen the Sony convention. We've seen Las Vegas convention halls. We've seen all that stuff, right? That's great.
yeah,
That would be great. Like obviously 20 years ago, you say like, "Oh, this is where we're at right now." Incredible. I would never
yeah.
envision that. Okay, now we got to keep envisioning. Where are the dreamers?
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's a great parallel, and like that's terms that like you're talking about the floor and the ceiling. That's something that's used in like sports all the time. It's just
Exactly.
like okay, we'll talk about well, John's floor is this. Like he's consistent. He's a top 8 finisher. Blah blah blah. Do we want to invest in him, or do we invest in the rookie or the younger player whose
Who just got top
ceiling
32? Who just got
yeah,
top
who got
32?
top 32 and whose ceiling looks better than John is. Like John's kind of like where
Right.
he's at, right?
Right.
Like, and it's like that's always kind of a thing, and it's just like,
Exactly.
yeah, if we go into the console era or another console kind of deal,
We're
like,
doomed.
yeah, I don't see that as a good thing because at
We're
this point, for
doomed.
me personally, like, I'm really not planning to buy any kind of like current gen console. So if the
Right.
standard is like
Yeah.
whatever PS5 or Xbox Series X, like I'll be like, you know what? I'm gonna play on my PC. I'll go there and hopefully my experience is still okay and it's not, PS3 Marvel or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
And
this.
So my last question on this topic is I get it in that we haven't been the community as a whole hasn't been moving forward in strides towards
yeah,
PC and towards the greener pastures that we
I
see.
will. I want to add
Um,
though before you go to your last question is that with Project L being Riot,
mm,
that will be very PC based. So
sure.
like
yeah,
I understand all the hype with six, and I know all the bad news with Project L. I can't say it. It's obviously like I personally can't say it. There's NDAs. I know like the development process right now currently for the game, but like it doesn't matter how bad it ships out, in my opinion, because it's going to be PC based. It's going to have Riot backing. The worst case scenario it becomes Legends of Runeterra. The best case scenario is that it becomes like TFT maybe, or like at the absolute peak, if it becomes Valorant, then it
Mhm.
doesn't matter. Everything will blow up. But that PC problem might be solved based off Project L.
Okay, so that was kind of the structure of my question, which is we have a
Sure.
bunch of different roles in our community: tournament organizer, player, influencer,
Yeah.
developer, right? So if the idea is we need to push this forward, like you have somebody like Arturo Sanchez who is pushing this forward and continually doing testing grounds and getting PC sponsorships and stuff, whose job is it ultimately to do this, to push the scene forward? Whose job is it to do that dreamer? Whose job is it to turn the dream into
It's
the
a
reality,
developer's
right?
job. It's a
It's
developer
developer.
job. It's developer,
Yeah,
and then it's also the three major TOs in North America, right? It's
yeah,
it's it's
that's what I
Rick,
say.
it's Jabali, and it's the Cannons. So like if they're up to it and they're not signing up on these like exclusivity deals with consoles or like these like AAA studios and whatnot, and like
Yeah,
pigeonholing themselves into these kind of like weird floor plays, we'll have
yeah,
ceiling plays because eventually people will open up to the point where it's like PC is now the viable technique or the viable like peripheral. So now you open up all of these sponsorship ideas that never existed, right? Like I mentioned to
yeah,
you as a joke, I'm tired of ramen sponsorships. Although I would love more ramen sponsorships, why don't we want like Corsair and SteelSeries to be a part of this community? Why don't we want
yeah,
mice and keyboards, speakers, monitors, all this stuff, right?
yeah,
We have monitors, but the reason why we don't have more monitors as sponsorships is because they don't need to be overclocked to this level. They don't have
yeah,
to be better than what Asus provides or like whatever current monitor sponsorship has always been the case. They don't need
yeah,
to be here because if they're only providing a monitor, and they can't provide anything else besides the monitor, there's no incentive. Like there's no incentive for them to stay.
yeah.
If they're
Okay.
only selling one of their five or six or seven, eight products, why
Yeah,
should they be a sponsor? Like they're only getting so much of the money that they can get. They would rather
yeah,
sponsor a 20-year-old game like CS:GO that has been on PC forever.
yeah, yeah. I know that's been a big thing too. I think James Chen, other people have mentioned it. Like the FGC, like they say, like the FGC is not the audience for that, or FGC is not going to buy that. But I was just like, if the platform is the
Exactly.
PC, like it's only going to be natural that people are going to buy stuff for it,
Right.
right?
Like I'm even thinking like from the perspective of podcast listeners, people listening to like these three yahoos talking right now. What would
Yeah,
somebody like that do to say, "Hey, yeah, I want PCs to become standard in our community"? Is it really just a game
yeah.
of convince those big guys?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
You have to set
Yeah,
it.
I think
It's a
I
trickle
think
down
it's
effect.
yeah, I think yeah, because I mean it's one of those things. It's just like especially for the FGC, the standard is Evo, right? And like I said, I brought up the PS3 Marvel or PS3, even Street Fighter 4, right? Like that was a big thing, right? Like at my locals in Alaska, everybody ran 360s, right? That was the optimal thing for Street Fighter 4. But
Which
then you go
still
to
is.
Evo and it's like you're dropping combos, like it's just like, oh man, my shit,
Right.
it became an excuse, but it was a valid excuse for the community because people were like, this isn't the best hardware to play this game on, and it
Right.
took people pushing back and for them to finally be like, you know what, we're going to get rid of this and we're going to go to the better platform, before they switched. And then the locals and everything else, like Tim said, it trickled down because like everybody's like, okay, now everybody's on board,
Right.
right? So it's just like I said, I'm looking into this PC thing like on a local level, just something that I want to try to do, but it's just like what I'm doing here in the East Valley of Arizona. Somebody might be like, oh, cool, they're running a PC tournament, but that's not gonna, unless one of those guys comes here and say, hey, what are you doing, or how are you running things so smoothly? If I can work out all the kinks, maybe that catches the eye of somebody else and it's like, oh,
Right.
you guys are running like clockwork, like there's no problems, whatever, like what are you doing differently? Then that might, you know who knows, Jabali or somebody is like, hey, what are you doing here? What maybe he's, I'm sure that they've thought about those kind of
They
problems,
probably have.
like,
I mean, we want to be optimistic and say like, oh, a local can change everything. A dreamer that in a smaller community can change everything. But unless it
Yeah, let's
gets
be real.
publicity and if it doesn't get picked up by a tournament people want to go to, what does it
yeah,
matter? At least for the
exactly,
greater FGC. Like, if it doesn't, like Benny said, like if it's not at Evo, why would people care? If it's not at
yeah,
Combo Breaker, if it's not at CEO, why should I change my format to be more optimal when these people are going to go to these huge majors and then play on suboptimal settings? Because like, what's the point of me training on this great hyperbolic chamber when I go into the freaking real world and it's all garbage? Like, I'm just training for no reason. I'm training to be worse.
Yeah, to give you guys an example, right, is like I am creatively bankrupt in Street Fighter V right now as far as wanting to play that game, and a
Yeah,
lot
because
of
of
that.
six.
It's not just that; it's that like I'm burned out, and I wanted. So my way of reinvigorating myself is to change my V trigger. So I'm playing Chun Li with V trigger 1 now. V trigger 1 causes the PlayStation 4 to drop frames. And so, I have a standing spinning bird kick bread and butter that's it's frame specific, and so it's like I don't get to fucking do that combo offline. I just don't. And like at TGZ or at any PS4, and so because of that, it's a trickle effect where it's like, well, now I can't learn this new V trigger. Now I'm stuck playing V trigger 2. Now I'm fucking bored again because I've been doing that for the past 4 years. I don't want to do this anymore. So like. And so the issue that I have is that we did this with Marvel, we did this with Street Fighter 4, where the community did push back and said, "Yeah, switch to 360," and they listened and they did it. This time with Street Fighter 5, we all said that PC sucks or PC is awesome. PS5 in particular is terrible. PS4 is also not very good. Nothing's changed, and I think it's going to take.
Like, that's why I mentioned with the Sony deal. Once the Sony exclusivity deal is gone, Evo can't. Evo literally legally could not pivot to anything but PS, right? Like they couldn't. Sure. And because Rick is on the console for Evo, his tournament Combo Breaker, which is the second biggest tournament in America, has to run by his own other company, which is Evo. He's gonna run PS. Yeah. And Jabali, as the third highest, biggest NA promoter, he's not gonna deviate from his buddies because they're in the same console together.
Yep.
For lack of a better term, right? They're in the same console together. So like they're like, okay, well, if I'm doing that, it looks like I'm actively pushing against my own TOs, and they're trying to
they're trying to present a unified
provide
front.
solidarity, right? So like, of course, he's then also going to run PSs. They like Benny's have said, have probably understood that PC has been the format and should be the format for years. But also, as Vaya has noted 8 years ago, buying a ton of PCs for a tournament is incredibly expensive.
It's not financially viable. Yeah.
It's not financially viable, but it's also not even financially like realistic.
So that takes me back to like my takeaway from our entire conversation today is that the way to fix this is another suit has to write a check. And they're that's the same folks that are keeping us in the situation anyway.
It existed before, right? When Alienware provided these consoles for VIA to use. They weren't that there was pretty good amount. There was like maybe like 15 of those. So like you just gotta have some sort of spark of luck. Maybe Intel hears whatever VIA has been preaching about offline, whatever, or like they see the viability and visibility of the FGC. But that's why it's not up to the TOs. That's why I said like TOs have a part of it, but it's up to the developers. Yeah, because if the game catches on, if the game is popular, then the sponsorships will come as a matter of osmosis, right?
Yeah.
Like Valorant got very popular, therefore sponsorships wanted to be a part of it. If Valorant didn't become popular, regardless of the producer and the developer, nobody would give a shit about it, right? They wouldn't get as much sponsorship as they would, and they wouldn't be able to create a league, even though it's Riot. They would be like, okay, great, but the game's not popular, so I don't care. Look at Overwatch, right? Overwatch had Coke as a sponsorship. They lost that shit immediately because of how badly the game was as a spectator sport. So they lost their biggest sponsorship within a year. You don't say that because it's Blizzard. They'd be like, well, but Blizzard, right? They had their own league. It's like, it doesn't matter. Coke left because they're like, this game is not good. We're leaving. Why am I flushing money? So if Project L blows up, exactly. If Project L blows up because of Riot's incredible support and the community backing it and the casuals because of all the first player support and all that stuff, arcade mode is really good or whatever other features they have, then you'll have sponsorships potentially talking. If Street Fighter 6 is as good as the beta indicates, the direction it's indicating, and it's the same team that really was the balancing team for Street Fighter 5 for the last couple of seasons, it's going to do really well. And therefore, TOs have the opportunities to maybe pivot. Sony then has to be like, well, we can't really buy you because there's other companies now vying for your attention. And what if a PC company comes in and goes like, hey, by the way, we really like this whole thing. We see the growth in your community and the potential. We would like to invest in. And then the TOs would be like, yes, finally, thank you. PC to become standard. The community growth becomes like a natural born situation. People will wonder why this happened. It's like, it happened because the games are good now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But not
So
just that,
yeah,
but it has like exposure, right? You have to have exposure.
yeah, you call it trickle down. I call it domino effect more than anything else. It seems
Sure,
like
I call it
trickle down. I
trickle down
associate it
because
with something very different.
no,
Yeah.
we're not talking about trickle down economics. I'm talking about
Uh,
trickle down as the terminology
Yeah,
indicates.
I
Yeah,
mean,
no,
it's
Domino.
I
it's
understand.
just one of those things. Like, people are gonna gravitate towards what the standard is or what the popular thing is, and the standard for our community is Evo as of right now, and
Sure.
those major tournaments, and as long as those tournaments are continuing to run on certain platforms, like that's what like people are gonna do. Because I mean, it's like Tim said, like why train on an optimal PC setup when you
And
gotta
then, yeah,
go play on something suboptimal? Because like I mean, you've talked about that too, John. I mean, you
Yeah.
brought that example up with TGZ. You're like, oh man, I get to go see guys, but then it's like, oh shit, I gotta go play on PS4. And I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh man, like you shouldn't have to feel that way. Like when you go play with your friends and go to a venue, go to a tournament, right? Like I don't want to go to a tournament and be like, oh man, they're playing on these shitty consoles. Like man, you
Yeah.
kind of like in a way you're kind of walking in with like a negative mentality, just kind of being a downer like to start, and it's just like, oh man, this is gonna suck.
right.
Versus it's like, oh man, I get to go to this tournament and we got this and this. Like you shouldn't even have to even think about
Yeah.
optimal setups like when you're going to like a tournament. Like that should be the last thing on your mind.
Speaking of preconceived notions, when I was going into this episode, I actually had no idea what the hell we were going to talk about. We didn't even talk about the thing I thought we would.
That's
Yeah.
next time. That's what I'm
That's
saying.
next
It's gonna be
time,
next
right?
time. I
So we
told you.
we went through all the current FGC events.
I even
and
told
so
you it was gonna happen.
in an
Well,
attempt to bring some levity, here's my concluding question for you before I give
Yep.
the floor to Benny here.
I told you I was gonna be a historian today.
Yeah, totally. So you are part of an organization called the Fighting 99. On Twitter, prior to this episode, I asked you the age-old question, what is the Fighting 99? And you responded that that is something that you would not be able to betray your brethren for.
Yeah,
So, I would like to formally request that the Absolute Guard, also known as the co-hosts Jonathan Toy and Benny, Benneth Camacho II, be inducted as honorary members of the Fighting 99.
it's not up to me either, man. I mean, you gotta talk to the founding members, which I'm only a part of.
We don't totally. We talked to one already, and he was cool with it. I don't
What did
actually
he
know if he
say?
was cool
What
with
did he
it.
say? What did Nick say? Wait, what did Nick say?
No, we didn't actually ask him about the Fight 99. I completely
Oh,
forgot
okay.
about it. But
There's four founding members. It's in the Twitter. You gotta
And-
get all four of us. It's like Exodia.
if you make us members, though, then you can share with us the answer to that question. And I
I'm
promise
honest-
not to share that with the podcast
hey,
at all.
here we go, John. I got it now. We gotta entice him with the food and the tournament and the
Oh,
lodging
that's it,
in
that's
Arizona.
it, that's it.
Bring them all together.
That's
Yeah,
true.
or maybe
we can
Parsec
reconvene.
afterwards or something.
I
right?
want to I want to preset this by saying that I think I'm the only one that knows what it means still. I can I genuinely do not believe John, Nick, or even Christian knows what it means anymore. I do know what it means because I'm the one that made the name up. So like
Oh,
obviously I know what it means or what it stands for. I was there. I was like one and a half of why the name is what it is. So
Like
I
I'm
obviously
lost
know
in-
what it means.
It's locked away.
so
in
you're
a
like the
text
Fighting
somewhere.
49 then, right?
I'm the fight.
The other
I'm
half.
the fighting 90. I'm the fighting 95.
All right.
But no, I'd like, yeah, honestly, like when it came to this episode, I didn't know what this was gonna be, and in a ways, like it was kind of an experiment, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Like,
Good.
I didn't think, I never think anything bad. I'm a pretty optimistic and pretty positive person, and I was just like, and as we've gotten through, we're on episode 17 now. As we've gone through, like, I feel like me and John have kind of got, real comfortable with each other, and it's just like we've gotten to the points where we can literally just openly talk with people, and it's just like I don't necessarily, because before, I mean, not that we were trying to be rigid, but it was just like we were trying to like corral people into certain things to talk about, and we kind of had like guidelines on, okay, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and now it's more kind of like a natural flow.
You still
And-
want to have some sort of structure for sure, because you
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want it to be
yeah,
off
for
the
sure.
rails.
Yeah. We still we still have like a basic structure, but it's not as rigid as it was before. I feel like before, like we were really trying to like nail down being more rigid, and now it's a little bit more free flowing and a little bit
Yeah.
more open. And
Yeah, like
um,
prior to this, I would have been like, specifically with Tim, I wanted to talk with him about ESPN's involvement in Evo 2016, and we're not going to talk about that. So consider that a teaser for the next time that Tim comes on the show.
oh, speaking of that, my kids
Yeah.
are actually on that ESPN website. for that Evo. They were sleeping on the floor
I
in the
bet
floor of the convention center, and I don't know. I was trying to find that picture online again, but it's I think it's deleted from ESPN somewhere. But they had
Well, now we
actually
have some
like taken
time.
a picture of that.
Yeah, you can
They had
find
taken a
it. You can find
picture
it
of
for
that.
next
Yeah, go
show.
look. They took a picture of like the three of them like laying on the floor, and it was like posted as part of like the Evo whatever section of
Oh,
ESPN that year,
it's
which was kind
probably
of
still
cool.
there. It's probably still
Yeah,
there.
I just gotta find the URL or something.
Right. They like literally keep everything there, so it's probably still there.
Yeah, but I mean, overall, like, yeah, this has been a real enjoyable episode. Like, I mean, you can say you're a pioneer for our podcast because you're the first one that's really. I mean, I would consider you kind of honorary AZ,
I
but
agree. Even though we're not honorary fighting 99, at the very least, you're honorary AZ. But
It's an
fuck.
exclusive group, man.
Ah.
We even have a prayer. If you listen to the podcast, we have a prayer at the beginning. We have everything. You gotta know all the rites of passage.
No one listens to podcasts anymore, man.
Well, I mean, they barely even listened to us when we first came out. I'm so genuinely surprised that we even had like 100 people listen to us,
I
because our format was like we had a topic, and then our personalities were so different in the fact that we would clash on so many opinions, right? Because I think you already noticed from the hour that we've spoken that I'm very hard headed. I'm very like I have like contrarian points of views, but I'm also very headstrong with what I have conviction wise. And
Mm.
Nick is kind of like, Nick is kind of just like, we'll let everyone else talk. And John, John's pretty hard headed too. And then Christian's also very hard headed. So, like, if we had contrarian points of views, it would just be like a constant lightning bolt fight, right? Like, it would just be like everybody at war.
Yeah,
So, I
that's
don't
true.
even know how enjoyable of a listen we were. I'm sure we probably weren't that enjoyable if I had to like think about it.
Uh,
If I listened to it, I think it'd be funny because I think I'm a funny guy. That's the only reason why.
Yeah,
well, there you go.
yeah.
There's
Okay,
there's
well,
my there's my stinger for the beginning of the episode. I'm a funny guy. Ba, 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 ba.
okay. So before we kind of close things out here, Tim, was there anything that you wanted to promote or talk about?
What is there to promote?
I don't
I
know.
don't
Your
Like what?
Twitter? You have at Shippleton, right? That was the big one.
Yeah, I mean, like if I write stuff, I don't know, read my stuff. That's
When you
it.
say write stuff, as in you are a games journalist, right?
Yeah,
You
I
worked
write
in the
about
journal.
esports events and whatnot. I'll probably have articles about everything though. I mean, like I want the FGC. I've been a big proponent about growth for FGC. That's why that topic ran as long as it did, because I
Mm-hmm.
personally feel like I'm one of those people that genuinely wants the scene to like absolutely explode. And I've wanted it to explode for years, right? Like I've just wanted
Yeah.
it to be a mainstream situation. I hate those people that say like, "Oh, stay grassroots forever." It's like, no, stay irrelevant. You know what I mean? Go
Yeah,
away. I don't want you to be here anymore because you're not here for the promotion and growth of a community. Communities
yeah,
only get better and healthier when it grows. What kind of statement have you ever heard where it's like, I want a community to stagnate and stay the same? I've never heard anyone say that. I think that's crazy. The only thing I want promoting is the FGC. I hope Street Fighter 6 blows it up. I hope Project L blows it up. I hope I get more work as a result. I want the community
yeah.
to become a little more mainstream. I don't care that they're young and stupid, uh, because I'm not a part of that part anymore. But like, I want everything else to like absolutely blow up as a result. So, yeah,
That's a
that's it.
Nice.
that's a strong thesis statement, I think.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like that.
basically.
Yeah. I like that. If you're gonna promote anything, I'm gonna promote the FGC. That's awesome,
It
man.
has to,
Well,
man. Like,
Well, speaking of promotion, who do we have next week, Benny?
so next week we're gonna be talking with Mr. Will Get Paid, part
Hey,
of our AZ Tekken scene. We had talked to him previously with the Tucson versus Phoenix 10v10 along with Sean Dude. We wanted to bring him back. If you haven't noticed already, our kind of theme for this season is kind of a mixture of recurring guests and then also bringing on people that are new, recurring guests, just because I mean, we feel like we still got a ton of stuff to talk about with a lot of people. Like, we're kind of just scratching the surface with certain things. Kind of want to, what's the word I'm thinking of?
special interest episodes, right? That's we get to do some
Yeah,
really
yeah,
fun
exactly.
stuff.
Yeah, we definitely want to like talk to more people. Where I'm in the works of looking into some people in the Marvel scene to talk to. I mean, we've talked to Nam, but I mean, I'm looking into some other people. So I know I see comments for that all the time. Like, oh, what about Marvel? You put the timeline up. What about Marvel? And it's like, yeah, we got to talk to those people first. Like, I don't want to just like fill
We
things
also
in.
have a special interview with the Devastation crew scheduled for a couple weeks from now too. That's
whoa,
going to be a
who?
fun one. That one we will announce with the Will Get Paid show. I think
Okay.
that one's gonna be a nice one.
Yeah, just tune into the Twitter. Yeah, John will share information on that, like when we officially put all that out there. But as always, you can catch us on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. As of right now, that's our schedule. On Twitch at twitch.tv/spiral series, on YouTube with the VODs at youtube.com/spiral series, and then on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts under Absolute Guard. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks again for joining us, Tim. I'll talk to you later, John.
See ya.